The People Power Party agrees to the idea of holding a referendum to revise the constitution on the day of the upcoming presidential election. The Democratic Party says it agrees in principle, but says the country should first focus on addressing the insurrection. The date for the snap election is likely to be set at June 3rd, as sources say it'll be confirmed at a cabinet meeting tomorrow. Rival parties are quickly switching to prepare for the race. Local stocks plunged more than 5% on Monday on fears over major U.S. tariffs. In the morning, program trading on KOSPI had to be halted at one point. It's April 7th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. With the country slated to hold an early presidential election in the weeks to come, politicians start responding to the idea of revising the constitution. Kim Do-yeon covers responses from rival parties.
The leaders of South Korea's two major parties on Monday gave the green light to National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik's proposal for constitutional reform in light of the upcoming presidential election. But it came with a caveat, as the chair of the Democratic Party of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, is cautious as there are more important tasks at hand.
But right now, what's far more urgent and important is preventing the destruction of democracy. The immediate focus should be on ending the insurrection. I hope the People Power Party isn't thinking of using constitutional reform as a way to simply move past this. But yes, reform is necessary.
However, he confirmed that he agrees that certain aspects of the Constitution need to be changed, such as adding the spirit of the Gwangju May 18th pro-democratization movement to the Constitution, among other things. Laws need to be revised for this nationwide referendum to happen, and he has agreed to get work done to make it possible alongside the presidential election in less than 60 days. In terms of the presidential term, he agreed on 2 4-year terms like the U.S. model. Meanwhile, the People Power Party welcomed the constitutional reform proposal while saying that they're already working on the details from their side.
It's not just about dispersing power. The system must be restructured so checks and balances function properly. Just as presidential powers are being reviewed, the authority of the National Assembly must also be adjusted in a balanced way.
Kwon said that as much as the presidential authority needs to be adjusted, the parliament's authority needs to be adjusted as well. At the moment, the parliament has impeachment motion power over 4 different branches of government, and Kwon says it has been imperialistic with its power recently, as the opposition holds the majority of the floor. He said no one expected this in 1987 when the current constitution was passed, saying it needs to reflect the world we live in now. Speaker Woo, after the two leaders' comments, welcomed the two main parties are on board with the constitutional reform. But as the DP leader was cautious, the referendum targeted for the next presidential election in less than 60 days can just be on what's agreed upon until then. With the presidential powers at the heart of the constitutional reform debate, voters heading to the polls in less than 60 days won't just be choosing the next president. They'll also be weighing each party's vision for the presidency and its powers, especially in the wake of a push for a martial law rule by a former president. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And preparations are underway for an early election, most likely on the 3rd of June. Shin Ha-young has the latest. The date for South Korea's 21st presidential election has been tentatively set for June 3rd. That's according to Yonhap News Agency, with the date expected to be confirmed at Tuesday's cabinet meeting. South Korea's presidential race is heating up as rival parties roll up their sleeves to prepare for a 2-month race following the Constitutional Court's decision to remove former President Yoon Suk-yeol from office. The People Power Party formed an election committee on Monday for the upcoming presidential primary. The party chose Hwang Woo-yeol, a former party interim leader and former 5-term lawmaker, as its election committee chair.
Since Wang recently served as our party's interim emergency committee leader after the general election, he knows the party well. We believe he's the right person to run the primary fairly and objectively.
The party on Sunday decided to continue with its current leadership, with interim leader Kwon Young-se and floor leader Kwon Song-dong set to stay to carry out the remainder of the presidential election process. The party does not have a clear frontrunner, with some local media outlets expecting as many as 10 contenders to enter the race. Among them is Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo, who hinted at another run after he finished second to Yoon Sung-yeol in the party's 2022 presidential primary. Seoul Mayor Oh Se-won is also frequently mentioned as a potential candidate. The most high-profile name, however, is former party chair Han Dong-un, once a close confidant of Yoon, who later distanced himself from the former president and publicly supported impeachment following the martial law declaration. Meanwhile, Democratic Party chair Lee Jae-myung, widely seen as the likely DP candidate, is expected to step down from his leadership role and make an official declaration to enter the race as early as Wednesday. Running as party chair could raise concerns about bias in the primary process. Local media anticipate that his formal announcement will come when the presidential election date is officially confirmed. Once he steps down, the DP plans to hold a meeting to set up an election committee for the primary.
We only have about 30 days for the primary, so we need to sort out any party rules, make changes if needed, and set up the election committee to get ready for the presidential race.
Politicians outside the East faction within the DP are also preparing to enter the race. Among them, former DP lawmaker Kim Do-gun was the first to make an official declaration to join the race. 신하영, Arirang News.
Major U.S. tariffs are sending shockwaves across global stock markets. Today, Korean stocks were in free fall, down over 5%. Trading had to be halted in the morning to ward off panic selling. Lee Soo-jin reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff announcements have triggered massive sell-offs across South Korea's stock market. The Korea Exchange at 9:12 a.m. on Monday activated a sell-side sidecar for the first time in 8 months when the KOSPI 200 futures index fell 5.19% to 312.05. A sidecar is triggered when the KOSPI 200 futures index rises or falls by 5% or more and stays there for at least 1 minute. On Monday, the sidecar was activated for 5 minutes. And stock indexes also took a hit amid mounting investor concerns over the impact of U.S. tariffs. Both the benchmark KOSPI and the tech-heavy KOSDAQ closed down more than 5%, the KOSPI down 5.57% to around 2,328, and the KOSDAQ 5.25% to 651. But one expert said a decline of this size is likely a temporary phenomenon, which is why a circuit breaker, triggered when the KOSPI and KOSDAQ indexes fall by 8% or more, is unlikely to be activated.
Today's market decline was likely driven by last Friday's slump in the U.S. market and President Trump's hardline stance over the weekend, which led to a 3 to 4% drop in U.S. futures that triggered foreign investor sell-offs. As such, the downturn is unlikely to continue for long.
The loss was led by foreign investors offloading shares as they reacted to sharp losses in U.S. markets. On Friday local time, Wall Street suffered sharp losses with the broad-based S&P 500 closing down 6%, the tech-heavy Nasdaq 5.8%, and the Dow Jones fell around 5.5%. This marked the second straight day of major losses, with the S&P and Dow Jones both suffering the biggest one-day drop since June 2020 on Thursday. In the foreign exchange market on Monday, the Korean won weakened against the dollar, closing at around 1,467, down 33.71 from the previous session after briefly topping 1,470 during intraday trading. The same expert said this reflects fears of a potential global economic downturn, noting that Korea's exchange rate with the dollar has surpassed the 1,401 mark 3 times in the past, during the 1997 IMF crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, and the U.S. Fed's aggressive rate hikes in 2022. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Against this backdrop, a baseline U.S. tariff of 10% on all imports entering the American markets went into effect this past weekend, and the country-specific duties are poised to take effect on Wednesday, with no prospect of a postponement. Moon Ji-young has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has refused to back down on tariffs on imports from most countries, despite the market turmoil they have caused. Speaking to reporters on Air Force One on Sunday evening, Trump characterized the tariff duties as quote medicine, while panicked investors continued a massive sell-off of global stocks. He warned foreign governments that they would have to pay a lot of money to lift sweeping tariffs.
I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me a deficit is a loss. We're going to have surpluses, or we're at worst going to be breaking even.
When asked about a potential trade deal with China, Trump underscored that no agreement would be reached unless the U.S. trade deficit with Beijing, currently at $1 trillion, is addressed. He also claimed that tariffs caused China to pull back from a deal regarding TikTok, which was nearly finalized, highlighting this as evidence of, quote, the power of tariffs. In response to tariff on Europe, Trump stated that the U.S. cannot afford to spend heavily on NATO to protect Europe while losing money on trade. Meanwhile, speaking to NBC on Sunday morning, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said more than 50 countries have begun negotiating with the U.S. since the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs. The comments go in line with Trump's remarks last week that every country has called the U.S. for talks. On the same day, Trump shared a post on social media that massive financial deficits can be cured only with tariffs, calling them a, quote, beautiful thing to behold. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
South Korea has pledged to ramp up efforts in response to China's recent export restrictions on rare earth elements. Following a meeting on Monday with relevant stakeholders, including the Trade and Foreign Ministries, the government aims to secure a public and private inventory of these minerals while preventing any lack of supply. As it is not an entire export ban, countries can still import elements such as graphite and gallium after obtaining an export permit from China's Ministry of Commerce. This comes amid Beijing's export controls as part of non-tariff retaliatory measures against the U.S. China provides around 90% of the world's rare earth supply, which is used to make weapons, electronics, and other consumer goods. South Korea's industry minister met with high-ranking government officials from the Philippines on Monday to discuss ways to strengthen economic cooperation between the two countries. Minister An Dok-gun held talks in Seoul with a 23-member Philippine delegation, during which both sides pledged to expand cooperation in trade, investment, and supply chain resilience. They also agreed on the importance of deepening collaboration in critical minerals and clean energy. The meeting comes as South Korea is seeking to diversify its export markets in response to growing global trade uncertainties caused by U.S. President Trump's tariff campaign. A state-run think tank has highlighted the presence of greater external risk factors to the Korean economy, notably U.S. trade barriers. Moon Hye-ryun explains.
A state-run think tank has diagnosed continued downside risks to South Korea's economy for the fourth consecutive month, citing growing uncertainties in global trade. In the April edition of its monthly Economic Trends report, the Korea Development Institute stated that external conditions are rapidly deteriorating in light of the recent tariff announcement from the United States. And paired with a slowdown in both domestic and global demand, the situation is exacerbating. Last week, Washington announced that it would impose tariffs of 25% on South Korean goods and a separate 25% tariff on global automobiles and auto parts. Automobiles are South Korea's top export to the United States, with nearly half of the country's total auto shipments headed there last year.
The KDI noted that if the U.S. continues to escalate its protectionist trade measures, as U.S. President Trump has threatened to do, it could further erode corporate sentiment and hinder investment and export growth. While South Korea's exports rose by more than 3% in March, the think tank warned that this recovery remains fragile, with exports in the first quarter of the year showing a contraction due to a slowdown in the ICT sector. The KDI also pointed to continued sluggish consumer spending as another drag on the economy. While internal consumption of durable goods briefly rebounded thanks to a temporary tax cut on automobiles for the first half of the year, overall retail sales for January and February were down with persistent weakness in sales of semi-durable and non-durable goods. Consumer sentiment in March stayed pessimistic, with the central bank's consumer sentiment index data showing that it has yet to recover to levels seen before the martial law declaration last December. Going forward, the think tank stressed the importance of closely monitoring both global development and domestic demand to avoid further drag on recovery. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, Russia continues its air attacks on Ukraine, despite U.S. efforts to hammer out a ceasefire. Pyun Ye-young reports.
Twisted steel beams, shattered windows, and other mangled remains of residential blocks now scar the skyline of Kryvyi after a Russian missile strike on April 4th killed at least 20 people, including children playing in a park. Dozens were injured. As Ukraine observed a day of mourning, Russia launched more missiles and drones at Kyiv on Sunday, killing one and wounding several others. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks and criticized the U.S.'s tepid response to the attack on Kryvyi, his hometown.
Staying silent about the fact that it is Russia killing children with ballistic missiles is wrong and dangerous. It only emboldens Moscow to continue the war and keep ignoring diplomacy.
While Washington has yet to respond officially, Secretary of State Marco Rubio hinted at a possible shift in policy. Speaking in Brussels on Friday following a two-day NATO meeting, Rubio suggested that Washington's patience with Moscow is wearing thin and warned that Russia could soon face additional U.S. sanctions. Amid the military crisis, Ukraine is preparing for talks in Washington next week on a new draft for a mineral deal. According to the Associated Press, Ukraine's economy minister Yulia Svididenko confirmed that a Ukrainian delegation, including officials from the ministries of Economy, Foreign Affairs, Justice, and Finance, will head to the U.S. next week. The proposed agreement would give the U.S. access to critical resources such as rare earths, oil, and gas. European leaders are also pushing for tougher measures. French President Emmanuel Macron called for an immediate ceasefire and strong action if Russia continues to stall. Finnish President Alexander Stubb proposed April 20th, which marks both Easter and the 3-month anniversary of President Donald Trump's inauguration, as a deadline for Russia to comply with ceasefire terms. Pyun Ye-young, Arirang News.
The death toll from the strong earthquake that struck Myanmar has risen to over 3,500. According to the Associated Press, more than 5,000 people were injured and at least 200 remain missing. Heavy rain and strong winds over the weekend disrupted rescue efforts, temporarily halting the use of electrical equipment. Despite the severe weather, recovery efforts continue with Mandalay Airport reopening and rail services to Yangon restored. Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us in the studio is our sports editor, Paul Neat. Hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Let us start with football. It's been another successful season in the French capital for Kang-in.
Yes, Paris Saint-Germain are the champions of France for the 4th year in a row. It's now 2 in a row for South Korean star Kang-in. PSG on Saturday sealed a 1-0 home win over Angers to secure the Ligue title. This meant a 22-point lead with 6 games to go. Now, Lee has made 26 appearances for PSG so far this season, scoring 6 and assisting 5 more than he did last season already. PSG have also gone unbeaten in the league so far, winning 23 from 28 matches played. And there could be more silverware as PSG have a Champions League last 8 tie with Aston Villa to come later this week and the FIFA Club World Cup in June.
And moving on to baseball, the KBO seems to set new attendance records all the time these days.
It really does. The latest is the fastest to 1 million fans. According to the KBO on Sunday, after 3 of the 5 games were sold out, there had been 1,059,380 fans in the stands so far after 60 games. The previous record was 65 games set back in 2012. There have been 30 sellouts so far this season. There were 221 in total last year, with 10.88 million fans in total. Both of those are records. But it's not all good news. The NC Dinos will play their next few home games elsewhere due to ongoing safety checks at their stadium in Changwon. A fan died last week after a piece of metal hit them on the head inside the stadium. The club had already suspended sales of tickets, and the series with the SSG Landers last week was cancelled. But now the series with the Lotte Giants will take place at Sajik Baseball Stadium in Busan instead.
And finally, in Major League Baseball, Lee Jung-hoo's excellent start to the new season continues.
Yes, 7 games in a row now for hits for him, and 2 in a row when it comes to multi-hits. Lee Jung-hoo and the San Francisco Giants beat the Seattle Mariners 5-4 on Sunday. He batted 3rd and went 2 for 4 with 1 run scored. Another hit also meant that he has a league-leading 6 doubles so far this season, and 6 is also a new career high for him, having recorded 4 last year before injury ended his season early. He batted 0 for 2 on the opening day, but has landed hits in every game since then, and 10 runs in total is the most among the Giants players. The win was the Giants' 7th in a row, and they sit top of the National League West at 8-1.
All right, thank you for the roundup. See you next time. See you next week.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy the nice and warm weather today? The temperature in Seoul rose up to 20 degrees Celsius today, feeling like late April to early May already. It will be as warm as 9 degrees in the morning and 19 degrees during the day in Seoul tomorrow. The daily temperature difference will be as wide as around 10 degrees nationwide. In addition, the sky will gradually become cloudy in the west of central regions, including Seoul from tonight. There is some light rain forecast of less than 5 millimeters overnight in this area. It will mostly stop by dawn tomorrow, but it could be accompanied by gusty winds and thunderstorms. Tomorrow morning, Daejeon and Gyeongju will start off at 10 degrees, Busan at 12 degrees. Daily highs will move up to at least 19 degrees all over the country. There's more rain forecast between Wednesday and Thursday and on the weekend nationwide. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.